Now, you all noticed the storms over the weekend, and I thought this morning I was going to have the calm before the storm. I thought the 2Bs weren't available. Well, at least 50% of them are, so I've got 50% misery. Morning.
Good morning, Keith. How are you?
Well, I have to admit, I'm all the better for seeing him.
Right. Well, that's very kind of you. As you know, Keith, I've got limited time this morning because, strange but true, I'm not retired yet.
Far from it.
It's only a matter of time. Well, I hope it's only a matter of time. I want to be like my dad, who said, "At least I've made old bones." Keith, what I would like to talk to you about today is because over the weekend I've had to be tippy typing things up on a computer, and albeit I was happy to write things when I was a student, that's how you pass your exams and all that sort of thing, I now just find it very dull. So the written word as opposed to the spoken word. I just wanted to ask you because as a journalist, and I would imagine you must have done both, what did you find easier? Was it the written word or the spoken word?
Well, I don't know about easier, but more interesting, certainly the spoken word. And long before people did what I do now, and that is absorb myself into the topic and then try hard to make sure I don't libel anybody by not using a script. Martin Bell
Yes.
was the chap that
with the white suit.
That's right.
Yep.
And he introduced this style of broadcasting. What he would do is he would go out with the cameraman, and they would shoot the footage, and then he would watch the footage, and he would talk to it. And everybody else, including me, were using scripts, and we had fancy things to attach to the cameras so that we could have auto cue and all sorts of things. And he was doing exactly the opposite. And I can remember saying to a senior cameraman at Reuters, "Oh, that's a bit dangerous. I had got my, and I think I like to think I'm a bit open-minded about this industry, and perhaps hopefully a lot of things. I was poo-pooing it, and now I do it all the time. And to be quite honest with you, it would be tedious to go back to writing a script.
Is it midsummer an extreme where the head of the mechanical says, "I will read it"? No, it's not. It's Bottom, in fact, who says, "I will read it extemporized." And that's exactly what you're talking about, isn't it? In other words, not actually reading it, but you'll just not make it up as you go along. But it does make for a difference, I think, to the audience if they believe that you're talking to them as opposed to reading to them.
Yes, speaking to them, having a conversation with them. You're quite right. Yes. It's strange that you should raise this, because actually I did this on Friday. I was a bit pressed for time, and I had done a lot of work in putting together some video on Horatio Bottomley. So I decided to. I'm not an expert on Horatio Bottomley, but I know more about him than most. So I ran the video, and I actually talked to it, and I think I got away with it. I think it was okay. And in fact, what I found was that the more I actually was talking to these pictures, is the more passionate I was getting, which I wouldn't have done if I'd been reading it.
Well, the reason I raise it is that, as I said, I spent the weekend having to type out documents, which when you're sitting waiting for the cricket to start and then England losing the Ashes, is a desperately frustrating thing. But this morning I'm going to go to court and I'm going to make a closing speech. and here are my notes. Oh, I don't have a note. Of course I don't have a note. It's all in my head. And as long as I don't do an Ed Miliband, I don't know if you remember when at a Labour Party conference he gave a speech without notes.
I do, yes.
And he missed out referring to matters financial and got heavily criticised for it. Never do that. Never, know your topics.
Yes.
Have them in here. And I find, oddly enough, Keith, I know you have your Harley Davidson motor scooter that you roar around town on. I have my dog, and the very best times for me preparing what I'm going to say are when I walk him. And then it just...
Or sit in the pub with him. Because I watched you the other day.
You did.
Yes, and you were using your dog as the sounding board.
Yep.
And I must say, a very fine companion he is too, and he adores you, which makes me worry that he perhaps is not critical enough of you. But other than that,
he can be very critical of my speeches. Yes. During COVID, throughout COVID, he sat in my room next to my desk when I had hit remote hearings, and we still do have remote hearings from time to time. And I think he's therefore qualified as a barrister, actually, because he's done more court hearings than most people do before they qualify. But yeah, he'll afterwards he'll just say, "Listen, Dad, you didn't do that bit very well, mate. You could have worded that a bit better. You could have fashioned it in a different way." So, Keith, if you had the choice between being a journalist in writing or a journalist in the spoken word, which one would you have preferred to have done? Let's assume you can only do one. I know you did both, but let's assume you can only do one.
Spoken.
Yeah.
I mean, to be quite honest with you, words written can be very powerful. But generally speaking, is somebody reads them to make them even more powerful. So the spoken word, to me, very well used in the way that Churchill used it, for instance, and other renowned orators, it's a real challenge.
You're sitting next to me. No.
I'm sure you are, actually. Let's face it. I can't bump into anybody that isn't full of praise for you. No, that's true. You should see him in front of the judge.
Whatever. But there is a joy, isn't there, about, as you do with this, and I can understand why you do it, talking to an audience. And without a script, not a piece of paper between us, but you're able to talk, and you're able to get your points across, and people listen.
Yes. One thing I would say, though, Richard, is that I've never been able to come to grips with is how many people are viewing you and listening to you. Now, in my halcyon days, when I was working with Melissa Conte, we had 8 million viewers daily, coast to coast in the States. But all I could ever see were a couple of technicians playing around with the camera. Yeah. I had no real concept of the immensity of what we're doing.
And you never had nerves as a consequence?
No. In my early days, obviously I did.
I was going to ask you about that, because certainly when I started, I was a very nervous young barrister who wasn't very good at talking, but I learnt it. How long do you think it took you to become comfortable with just talking to people?
I would say a good 5 years or more.
I was going to say it was certainly 3 to 4 years for me, and I'll be absolutely straight with you. One man and his dog. that for the first 3 or 4 years of my career, I would be in court sitting there waiting, and then somebody, the judge would say, "Mr. Barton, what do you say about this?" And I would be quaking and thinking I might actually vomit rather than standing up because I'm so nervous.
Yeah.
And now,
Yeah.
bloody years later,
I think, Richard, it's also to do with maturity. I can remember when I was 18 and surrounded by fellow students, and I would think, "Oh God, how mature they are!" And look how well they handle life, and so on and so forth. And by the time I was 25 or 26, those same people that I still knew, and I realized that they hadn't developed at all.
Progressed.
But I had, yeah.
And there's an odd truth about being a barrister on that very point, Keith, which is that, of course, you always have at least one opponent. There's always somebody who's arguing the other side of the case against you. And I always say to people, it doesn't matter how old you are, it doesn't matter how long you've been doing the job, listen to that person, because they, no matter how young they are, they might in fact have quite segueing through the difficult bits, because we all have difficult bits, as you can imagine. And you learn from people. I've certainly learned from a host of other barristers. One thing you'll notice is that I use pauses like that, just like that. And one of the reasons I do that is that I picked it up from somebody more senior from my chambers, because I noticed that when he did it, people would hang on to his every word. And I'm not suggesting you're doing that. You're all asleep now, of course you are. It doesn't. The dog's asleep, the one man's asleep. But there is a little. It's not an art. It's a craft about engaging people, talking to them, making them listen to you. And what you mustn't, ever do is read it out. We all hate going to a wedding reception and somebody who has no ability to speak in public is the best man. One thing worse, Keith, one thing that's worse is going to a funeral. And I remember going to my parents' funeral, and they had a sort of whatever they're called, celebrant, whatever they're called. It wasn't religious. And this woman just read out stuff, and I thought, I don't really want that for me.
Yeah.
When I go, Keith, I want you to do the speech. Is that okay?
Yeah, that is okay. And in fact, I did it for my wife.
Did you really?
Yes. I was. It really set people back. Yeah. I mean, one of the little things I did is, strangely enough, before she died, she asked me if one more last time we could sit on the settee together and have a glass of wine. And she passed on before we could do that. So I took a glass of wine into the pulpit and sort of said, okay, couldn't do it then, I'll do it now. And so, yes, I've shown the same lack of deference for the way it should be done.
I didn't speak at the ceremonies for my two parents who died in the same year, but completely separately, both of things that were known, so it was expected. But I did speak at the wakes for both of them, and that's a slightly easier process, because then you can come out with the. I have some filthy stories about my father, who was he was he was never unfaithful or anything like that. He was just a man who knew no boundaries when it came to a range of things. And I mentioned a few of them. And of course, all the family, the extended family knew them. And that was much easier. And I thought that's easier than trying to say that in the process of sticking him in a pit.
Yeah. I think actually that doing things like that, whether it's at weddings or funerals or things in between, is if you know the subject that you're talking about and talking for, it's much easier because if they were full of humour, you can be full of humour, and it doesn't matter what the congregation thinks.
No,
and then if they were very serious and you're serious, once again you reflect that. Yeah.
Yes, and I think that's a problem with the idea of celebrants or whatever it might be, people who have had no contact with the person when they're, for example, alive. I remember our wedding, which was in Abingdon in Oxfordshire, and
Abingdon Loch.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And the person dealing with it, who was the local registrar, because that's what they are, the people, you know, it was a civil event, and she started speaking, and I heard my brother-in-law 2 rows back say, "She sounds like Mystic Meg." And she did. Many of you are too young to remember Mystic Meg, but she had this terrible voice. And in fact, what my wife and I had agreed, because we'd met her before, and we thought, oh gosh, she's, you know, there's a terrible dirge going on here when she speaks. We learnt our vows and said, we're not going to repeat them. We're simply going to say them. And I think I didn't say them all, so I think I've technically gotten out when it comes to the divorce. But anyway, that's a different point altogether. No. Stop the recording.
Oh dear.
Yeah. But Keith, if you had to give, say there is somebody younger than you, and I know there will be nobody younger than you watching this.
That's true.
What would your top 3 tips be in terms of talking in public?
Well, I always think that the best thing is, first of all, have a command of the language.
Yes.
I mean, you can't just use conversational words and so on and so forth and rabbit through it. You really need to make it something special in terms of the words, the choice of words.
May I just pause you there?
Yeah.
J.L. Austin was an Oxford professor of philosophy, whom I studied because his work impinged upon jurisprudence, which is the philosophy of law. And he said this, he said, words are our tools. We must use clean tools. And my children know that quote very, very well, because I drummed it into them, not, for example, to use the word like in every sentence.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Or I turned around and I said, and she turned around and she said, and you know, and it was just like, you know, whatever.
Yes.
No, so
I totally agree with you on that.
You know, and we're old fellas.
Yes.
I fully accept that, and language does change, of course.
Yes.
But the idea that you need to be able to express yourself in a way that other people understand you is really desperately important.
Absolutely. But we're both in the language business, of course.
Of course we are.
So perhaps we got a strike ahead of most people.
Yeah.
But the second point I would make is try to use as many things that were common to you and the person you're talking about or the topic you're talking about. In other words, base as much as you possibly can on your own personal experience.
Yep.
Because then it comes from inside you, and not only that, whether it's funny or sad or whatever, it's much easier to put the emotion into it.
Yep.
And I think that the third thing really is to try hard to encapsulate the thing, wrap it up, so that you use something at the end which makes them laugh, makes them wish that perhaps you got on a little bit more, but also to understand what it is that you talked about for the previous minutes.
May I just say, ladies and gentlemen, dogs and cats of the audience, possibly a guinea pig. Keith didn't know I was going to ask him that question, because this is completely extemporized. He didn't know I was even turning up.
This is our early morning breakfast meeting.
But he's just given you a beautiful summary of talking in public.
Oh, that's nice.
Like that, and I gave him no clue that I was going to ask that question, but he dealt with it, and all credit to him.
No, but I mean, I watched you and Philip together, and the two of you are masters of the spoken word. I mean, you bounce off one another, and at the same time, in being funny, you actually get over several serious points, and that is a skill that is I admire.
Yes, it's you can't always do it in court. Sometimes you can, but and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
But you patently enjoy getting up in front of a judge and arguing a case.
Yeah, I prefer getting up in front of a jury, and either opening a case or case I'm doing at the moment. I went home and I was asked how did Friday afternoon go, which was when I was, as I say, having a chat with a defendant that I'm prosecuting. In the witness box, I'm asking the questions. And I was able to say, I think it's the worst Friday afternoon he's had since he didn't get a crackerjack pencil. And yeah. And but you need to get the balance right, because you don't want somebody to get sympathy thinking there's that smart-ass lawyer who's just taking somebody apart for the sake of it. You need to get the balance right. And often when I've cross-examined somebody, as in the case that I'm doing at the moment, I have done, the closing speech is a bit like the last few bars of Nimrod by Elgar. I don't know if you know the piece of music. I recommend you go and listen to it.
Elgar is one of my favorite composers.
And there's a lot going on in it, but then it has a sort of what they might, I think it's Bottom again, who said it has a dying fall. In other words, it just sort of fades away. And a closing speech can be after you've cross-examined somebody, because that's the last thing the jury hear before I speak, is to actually just say, look, you've heard everything. Because and you compliment the jury and you say, we can all tell you've been listening, you've been concentrating on it, and so I don't need to repeat all of those points. And you don't repeat the points, because otherwise ramming it down their throat is exactly the last thing you want to do. It's a bit like the story of the sun and the wind, where to get the person to remove their what is it? Isn't it something with a cloak on or something? And the wind says, I can get him to remove his cloak, and the sun says, no, I will. And the sun, by that sort of warmth, gentle, gets the removal, as opposed to the wind, where the person just wraps it more firmly around them.
Yes.
That's an odd analogy, but
well, no, you also stirred something else in me when you say, the Elgar piece fades away. One of the favorite book, in my opinion, the best book ever written, is Wind in the Willows.
Oh, right.
And there is a chapter in it called The Piper at the Gates of Dawn.
Yes.
And Ratty and Mole go onto this island, and they go into the presence of the god Pan, which is the animal's god. And on the way back, they're rowing back, and it says they start to hear the mournful music, and then they're not sure. And then the reeds start to take it. And eventually, by the time they're finished, they don't think that they've been anywhere at all. In other words, the memory fades and fades and fades. And I think that sometimes it's rather good to go from a climax as you go back down, is to leave it and come into something that is quite quiet. And
you remind me of something there, which I think I'm right about. I may be wrong about. It would be the first time this decade that I'm wrong about something. Piper at the Gates of Dawn was also the name of a song by Jethro Tull. Now, Wind in the Willows is in fact set in Berkshire, just on the edge of the Thames there. And Jethro Tull took their name from an 18th century innovator of agriculture who lived in Berkshire. So there's an odd little link, isn't there?
Yes. Yes. I mean, since we're just talking about odd experiences, at Reuters, I was a business journalist and broadcasting daily to the United States. But once in a while, we were given leave to do something that had just turned us on. So we actually hired a skiff and went looking for the island in which Mole and Ratty have their picnic, and we would go to various islands and say, was this the island? Was this the island? And my wife had packed a picnic absolutely accurately to the book. And so here I've got the film somewhere. I was sitting there, sort of, and ginger pop and ham and sausage rolls and so on and so forth, with the stress in +4s. Right, these are serious business journalists, but it was great fun. Great fun.
Which character from there would you consider yourself to be?
Well, I have no choice. You turn me into Toad.
Yeah, well, I did wonder. I didn't want to say it. I didn't want to say it, but I quite understand.
I actually found myself slowing down when I go past your house.
Yes, drives too fast. Drives much too fast. Keith, I'm going to have to go because.
Well, this sort of early morning lovely chat is a nice way to start the Monday, nice way to start the day, but also. Because you're such a complete barrister, and I like to think that perhaps I'm not exactly a slouch.
Sorry, I didn't quite hear what you said. I'm a complete what?
Barrister.
Oh, right, okay. Sorry.
Not barista.
No, I just thought you were being very rude. That was all.
Oh, heavens, me rude? No, not at all. We've that's it. Otherwise, I can't switch this off without this. What was I going to say? I mean, it was a sheer delight to start the day off this way. Starting it off with the papers is just I can't get anybody else to come in here to do anything about it. So your early morning forays are wonderful. I'm glad that this is a good time of the day for you. But also, you and Philip have actually given me a new dimension to television. And that is that these casual chats, such as about football or about dogs or even about nothing at all, which then turn into something, are a good way to start television. And this is what I say to you. I like the two of you to be put the week in parentheses. Start off on a Monday morning and end on a Friday morning, and everything else fits in between. So this is a good program which is developed by accident, a chance meeting on a bus.
Absolutely, a chance meeting on the bus. Now, Keith, you won't know this, but I tell your viewers, in particular the dog, that I saw this morning that there was a 28 bus. And as we all know, the 28 bus goes to Ringmer.
Right.
But this one had on it going to Eastbourne. So I got on it and I said, what's happened? And the driver said, as of this morning, there will be a 28 that runs through Ringmer, through Hailsham, down to Eastbourne. Breaking news. You heard it here first.
Well, just the first thing in the morning, you can get to Eastbourne on the bus now.
Yep. Because it was always a bit tricky. You'd have to go typically into Brighton and that sort of thing. But now, in fact, you can go there directly, as long as you don't fall asleep.
Hey, I was about to say, if you fall asleep, you're in serious trouble. Particularly if you want to get back by train, because the trains are very sporadic at the moment.
Oh, tell me about it.
Yeah. But,
Keith, I must go.
Very good to see you. Thank you for joining us.
Not at all.
And I will talk to you during the week. In fact, I said in my email that if you've got a moment or two sometime during the week, perhaps we could have a drink together.
That would be very nice.
And with Dog, of course.
Oh, yeah. He comes along for everything.
Yeah, well, he wouldn't forgive us if we went for a drink without him.
No, exactly. Yeah. And he I think it's his round.
It is.
Yeah.
What a good reason for taking him.
Yeah. Bye.
Richard Barton, who as usual, came in to be very amusing and very informative first thing in the morning. So we will actually, this would normally be our news time. I haven't had time to prepare it because of this. So I'll be back at 9 o'clock.
Thank you.